As game demands have increased over the years, there has been an exponential rise in interest in athlete monitoring. While not completely new, athlete monitoring has pretty much become the norm in professional sport. From a practical perspective, monitoring player fitness levels on a regular basis has often required formal testing, which can be lengthy and time-consuming for practitioners, players, and coaches alike. This paper is a follow-on from the work of the late Nick Broad, with the idea being that the use of heart rate in response to football-specific drills and in comparison to historical data from previous drills can subsequently predict heart rate within the training session. Essentially speaking, the difference between the measured and predicted heart rates would be a simple, non-invasive indicator of fitness. For example, when the measured heart rate response is lower than that of the predicted heart rate, the fitter the player. The dual aim of this paper was to examine the ability of multivariate models to predict the heart rate responses to some specific training drills from various GPS variables, and to explore the usefulness of the predicted versus actual heart rate responses as a marker of player fitness or the readiness to perform. Therefore, the authors aim to quantify the relationships between the external load GPS variables and the internal load heart rate measures and assess if the differences between the predicted heart rate from the GPS variables and those actually measured could be used to make inferences about a player's fitness or readiness status. As previously mentioned in another video, metrics such as total distance or heart-related variables are largely influenced by contextual factors as opposed to the training status of players. In fact, total distance has been suggested as a poor marker of locomotor loads in soccer. This is possibly due to the lower threshold activities such as jogging or walking within practice and games. Therefore, there is scope for monitoring and analysis from a contextual perspective to give a greater indicator of changes in player fitness either positively or negatively, and that is ongoing without lengthy and formal testing. Using GPS and heart rate variables in isolation is extremely limited and arguably does not give a good indicator of the dose-response relationship between the work imposed and the acute physiological responses. However, we should be cognizant that there are many different non-training related variables that may affect the internal and external load relationship. These may include overall fitness, training age, playing position, and experience. Therefore, due to this relationship, using external load metrics to predict the internal load response would need to be individually specific and likely to be superior to any team average-based models. In this paper, the authors took 10 outfield players from a French elite football team. No player included in this study had an injury that required them to stop training for longer than 1 week. The data was collected across one season, with players wearing a 5 Hz GPS unit and a heart rate monitor. The variables collected from GPS were total distance, high-speed distance greater than 14.4 kilometers per hour, very high-speed distance greater than 19.8 kilometers per hour, alongside arbitrary units of velocity and force load and mechanical work. Velocity load is the sum of distance covered, which is weighted by the speed of displacement, while force load describes the sum of all estimated ground contacts during foot impacts. Mechanical work is an overall measure of velocity changes using accelerations, decelerations, and change of directions. Heart rate parameters were analysed during small-sided games from 5v5 to 10v10 and were either game simulations, which included goalkeepers, or possession-based. A submaximal run, which was paced at 12 kilometers per hour using audio cues, was also used. The mean observations per player were then used to build individual models for each player. From this, a multiple stepwise regression analysis was used to determine which of the combinations of GPS variables demonstrated the largest relationships with heart rate responses. From the GPS variables, the predicted heart rate was calculated and was adjusted for any changes in temperature. This is due to the potential and likely effect of heat on individual heart rate response to exercise. Through some equations, each of the actual heart rate responses to each small-sided game was compared with the predicted heart rate and expressed as a percentage. Therefore, the higher the difference in the change, the lower the fitness of the players, or a lower fitness than usual has been observed. In this paper, the authors reported that predicted heart rates from GPS variables during small-sided games were largely correlated with the actual heart rate responses measured, which is demonstrated on the top graph in this video. The authors also noted that force load and mechanical work were the largest predictors of heart rate response, and that total distance and high-speed variables explained less than 30% of total variance. Furthermore, the individual player equations based on force load, very high-speed running, and mechanical work, a 20% increase in either mechanical work or very high-speed running could be expected to increase heart rate response by 2.4% or 0.5% respectively. As the authors note, a lot of studies have focused on relative distance such as meters per minute and locomotor measures such as total distance and high-speed running and their relationships with heart rate responses. However, the results of this research indicates that the observed heart rate responses in training drills are more related to the mechanical demands such as the accels, decels and change of directions. Therefore, suggesting that mechanical work and force load should be taken into account when planning training and estimating relative internal load for players. The authors do note, however, that due to the large between-player differences in locomotor and heart rate responses, players will respond differently to different football and non-football drills. For example, some players may respond to low-number, small-space, small-sided games with a higher heart rate, and some may obtain higher heart rates through larger spaces and/or running-based interval drills. The authors also present a quadrant based on the sub-maximal run test as per the bottom graph in this video. Using the sub-maximal run, the authors hypothesized that this could be used as an indicator of general fitness, and the change in heart rate from small-sided games an indicator of specific fitness. As demonstrated by the quadrant, players transition from unfit in pre-season, the top right-hand corner, to generally fit in mid-pre-season in the top left corner, to specifically fit by the end of pre-season, bottom left. Of note here is demonstrated in the bottom right quadrant, which reports no players. This suggests that generic fitness is required before football-specific fitness. This gives scope for practitioners to understand which players require either more generic running-based conditioning, such as return from injury or early pre-season, or specific training such as high mechanical loading with the ball, which is generally at the end of pre-season or in season. While this model looks promising in being able to monitor player status and any subsequent positive or negative changes in fitness levels without any lengthy testing, there are some limitations noted. Firstly, historical player data that is limited would not be able to be used with this model, simply because the model requires more than 60 data points per player across a 6 to 8 week period, which means it is time consuming and not suitable for new signings who enter the training program late. Another limitation is compliance of heart rate monitor wearing, which can be an issue. Furthermore, heart rate data in team sports can be common and erroneous due to contacts, etc., and may lead to misinterpretations of fitness levels. The sequencing of small-sided games within a training week or session may also be an issue and can have an effect on the heart rate and locomotor response to training sessions. The authors note that small-sided games performed the day after a heavy session may demonstrate a lower heart rate, which is likely due to the plasma volume expansion. Furthermore, if small-sided games are performed at the end of the session, a higher heart rate may be observed due to the cardiac drift. However, while the findings of this study are preliminary and require further larger scale investigations, there is promise in this approach by somewhat eliminating the time-heavy formal testing and being able to track changes in individual responses to training demands on a regular basis, if not a daily